Hello, we're going after dark again. Now this time around, there's this fella, I think his name is Stefan or something, and he titled this video, "Society Lied to Us, We're All Wage Slaves, I Can Prove It." So much collectivism in one title. Now, this is a difficult video to talk about, because you have a young fella who fancies himself an expert of very many things, who has studied a lot of books, and who talks quite a lot about a lot of things. Specifically, to summarize, he speaks, he redefines the, I need to use all of these foul terms, but I have no other option because that's what they do. And by they, I mean people like this chap. He redefines the societal pyramid as a thing that doesn't have like an equidistant space between the lower class, middle class, and upper class. He redefines it as the working class being an enormous proportion of this pyramid, then a tiny sliver which he refers to as the middle class, and then another tiny sliver that he refers to as the elite class. Fundamentally speaking, the elite people are people who have such a stupid quantity of money that they control others, and by others, it's over 1,000, I believe he uses. The middle class are people that have a stupid amount of money, that's all what he says, but are not able to control other people somehow. And then the working class is everybody else, even people with a stupid amount of money, like 3 million net worth, I believe was his threshold or something. Because basically his contention is the people who are in the working class are people that must trade their time and effort for money, which then gets converted into various other things, and he frequently uses the term their wants and needs, and he uses it together, which I find very amusing. He uses them together as if they were part of an indistinguishable group, which is peculiar because one affects the other. But anyway, now so this is just sort of to give you the context. Now he's going to be talking about the word prole. He's been talking about it for a while already, and then he's going to talk about a different context. And I have a bit of advantage over him here because I speak multiple languages, which I don't believe this chap does. And I happen to have the luck of speaking the language, because prole is a Latin word, to speak the language where this word comes from. So I'm able to check the definition in multiple languages, check the etymology of the word in various ways. So I have a bit of an advantage. And this is going to sound fairly petty, because I'm going to be focusing on this word. And you know what? Fair enough. The problem is this chap talks so much and so long, lecturing you, a grown-ass man most likely, like me, okay, about things. And the hubris of youth is lovely, because I obviously had it. See, the advantage that I have to this chap, and the disadvantage that I have compared to a much more advanced man in age compared to me, is that I have seen enough to know that I know almost nothing. So Socratically, Socrates defined wisdom as this, right? He would say, I now know a fair bit. And what I know primarily, he would say, I'm obviously paraphrasing, but is that I know nothing. He would exaggerate it to nothing, because he thought that the level of knowledge that you actually accumulate within one lifetime is so small that you could approximate it to nothing. Which then brings you to the humble position that you're just not as keen as this young man is to make these all-sweeping proclamations that he has found this magical truth that apparently everybody else has missed. It is cute, in a sense. Now, he utilizes all of this knowledge and know-how of his and intelligence, which of course is unparalleled, to share that with us watchers, right? And throughout the entire video, this fella makes use of so many concepts that he treats as self-evident, which is why it becomes so difficult to cover a video like this that is like 40 minutes long, full to the brim of incorrect, my opinion of course, interpretation of things that happen in the world, and he treats them not so much as fact, it's more like gospel. It's like you're listening to a priest when you listen to somebody like this. An internet personality of times gone by, who would have gone by numerous names. One of them would have been Mr. Metacore or Billy the anti-bully advocate. He had very many nicknames. Very funny man. He would have referred to this as sniffing your own farts. This young fella is a champion of it. So now that I've done all this ridiculous premise, dude, the premise was like 6 minutes. Okay, sorry. I'm going to like approach this bit and then try and talk, like cover a few of the bits that he has talked about that really bothered me, and then we shall see. So off you go, young fella. I'm going to let you speak for a bit.
And so what's interesting is this term, the proletariat and the proles, it would be revived again in the industrial era because once again people started realizing, hey, wait a minute. The vast majority of people are nothing more than like, we just have to sell the use of our bodies and our minds in order to survive. And so you can see it in all kinds of philosophical writing. You can see it in famous books like 1984. In that book, this citizenry was called proles, right? So this term got revived because people realized that the working class has always been this idea of like a prole. Like, we are the modern proletariat if you're in the working class.
Are we now, considering the fact that we have no children at all? Okay, so in Roman times, like I said, I'm going to go down the petty route first. So in Roman times, my understanding, and this is an important point, because I don't know, I wasn't there, and neither was he, just so we're clear. We're all reading books that somebody else wrote, usually in much more modern times than when this would have been in any way accurate or relevant, okay? The word prole, very simply, in Roman times, in Latin, and meant children, offspring. That's literally what it means. A prole is an offspring, okay? Then over time, this was conflated, as I understand it, based on the Italian etymological definition, with the term pleb, plebeian, which was the lowest possible class in a rung of 6 classes, basically people who had nothing to their name other than their children, as he accurately said before. Okay? Then, much later, okay, this would have been what, 19th century or something. Okay? The word proletariat was coined and started being used all over the place. My understanding is after the French Revolution, where they would have essentially taken exactly the same concept, but removed this idea that these people were poor not only of means, but also of mind, which is what the meaning used to be, and instead they gave them more dignity, essentially, the thinkers of the time. And that became the proletariat, and then the whole communist movements, etc., started utilizing that word for themselves. Because this idea of the pyramid that has a bazillion people in it, and 99.9 some stupid number % of it is all proles, and there's 3 evil people at the top, whatever the number is, I mean, is as old as the planet. It's an old grievance that keeps being brought up. There's one tiny problem with it. It's imaginary. So that is an issue. Now, I'm not going to, unlike this young fella, launch myself into historical discussions and reasonings and so on and so forth. It's not particularly interesting, and I am not capable of doing it. The only difference between me and him is that I know I'm not. Okay? And yes, I am sure I'm less well-read than he is, but that's not the point. Because what he is doing is he is creating all sweeping categories and is ignoring the astonishing quantity of live examples that don't fit, and refers to them as rounding errors, essentially. They are irrelevancies, but that doesn't make any sense. And in this particular case, it's quite funny because in 1984, which is a bit fresher in my mind, the term prole is indeed used to mean the people. What we do not know, however, or at least I don't, is whether Eric Blair, George Orwell, was using the term like an Englishman, or was using the term in the Roman sense. Because was he referring to these people as the children, or was he referring to these people as the breeders, is the question. I don't necessarily know. But both of them are demeaning. The child is fundamentally stupid and needs to be cared for, right? And the breeder has no other skill other than that. It doesn't particularly matter. That's why I said that this is petty. However, it's even funnier now that he's using this term, this young man that is, to talk about his own generation, who have no children. Me having 5 is an absurd anomaly. Certainly where I live. There's, of course, other places which this is different. And that's fundamentally the point I was making before, which is the amount of differences is so severe that starting to create these all-sweeping theories is just a fool's errand. Okay? Now, let's leave the pettiness and move on a little bit to the concepts. So, in his definition of the working class, he at some point contrasts it. He makes a historical argument about people before agriculture. So he argues that before agriculture, or at least that's my understanding of what he argues, humans lived, he calls it the human era, and they lived in a different setup where the hunter-gatherers essentially would never allow for any kind of hierarchy to form. Because once there would be anybody who would dare to control others in some way, the hunter-gatherers would essentially band together and stop them. Usually violently, I would assume. He doesn't really go into detail on this. Now, I, like him, so we're clear, have absolutely no idea how it would have looked like. Okay? But I would imagine that one could think of a human hunter-gatherer as exceedingly similar to a predatory animal. To a predator, right? So, an animal that figures out how to live in a pack in vague harmony, to attempt to, hunt and gather, to feed himself and his pack. That's it. All of life would be spent doing this. Now, one can argue that at that point, this man, this hypothetical man, owns the means of his own productions, Maybe. What he doesn't own is any time. Because, I think I was reading this on a National Geographic, apparently a gorilla has to eat for like 9 hours a day or some stupid number like that, right? Because he needs to feed this enormous body and doesn't cook or doesn't do anything intelligent. So Like the quantity of time spent simply surviving, acting for pure survival, would have been so substantial that nothing else would have been possible. That is my interpretation of what he refers to as the human era, right? Yes, there are no classes because there is no point in having any type of hierarchy. Over time, I would imagine, human beings realized that it's possible to improve one's technology through invention and ingenuity and refinement in such a way that a man finally gains time and graduates from an entity that is consistently attempting to feed oneself, essentially, to satisfy his biological needs, to an entity that is much faster at satisfying his biological needs and now can dedicate his time in a different fashion. For example, thinking about things, behaving artistically, a pursuit that has no effect on one's biological imperatives, right? Or laboring in some other way. So much so that today, an individual such as this fella can talk rubbish for hours, or perhaps me, why not, right? Rubbish for hours, and some people can listen to their rubbish for hours, and somehow this forms an economical exchange. I mean, that's fascinating. That's quite a distance from that particular setup. Okay? Now he says that after the human era, when hierarchy is discovered somehow, that immediately destroys all balance. So everybody goes from being kings, which is an incorrect read, okay? Because everybody was not just peasants, was below. Everybody would have been a savage animal attempting to find the next bite. That would be my interpretation of it, okay? And then moves to an individual that says, if I organize with the people around me, develop language, develop all sorts of ways to come up with complex abstract concepts, I can achieve a lot more. And I can pursue something called meaning. Right? Like I said, writing poetry or whatever. It gets super complicated. This is why it's difficult to talk about these topics. Unlike this fella, one would need to account for many, 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 many things. And I'm not scratching any surface of anything just by objecting this way. Okay, so now this uncovers, this different key of reading that I'm proposing, uncovers a fundamental flaw of this individual, which ties us back together to the whole, how did Orwell use the word prole and what did he mean, right? He uses his rose-tinted glasses of today to evaluate the past. Something that is exceedingly difficult to do, requires a very high level of empathy. It's difficult enough to do nowadays with individuals that you personally know. Trying to walk a couple of steps in somebody else's shoes is very, very challenging to do. And it becomes more and more challenging the further the distance in time. Because attempting to even imagine what life would have been like most people, I would argue, perhaps I'm wrong, but let's say myself, I'm just going to talk about myself, right? When I think about life, I think about life within infinite light. And you might be wondering, what do you mean, Mike? Well, in my world, I flick a switch and I got light. This monitor in front of me is self-lit. I can see what's on it. Yeah, but it's dark right now. And it's winter right now. Right? I mean, an area in which there's a relative equity, let's say, between day and night based on where I live, right? If I lived in Sweden, I'm sure things would be very different, right? But generally speaking, yeah, I can see all the time. You go back to Roman times, They had fire, perhaps they had some form of oil, they had some basics, okay? But when it became dark, everybody goes to bed. Okay? Everybody's going to bed because there's nothing you can do. There's no alternative. He, at some point, talked about ancient Egypt. Even more so. Obviously, everybody figured out, I'm assuming by that point, I'm not just assuming, that's my understanding of it, that fire makes light. It's a very faint light, it's a very terrible light, it's a light that will knacker your eyes, but it's a light nonetheless, which allows some extension of the day. You remove that, even, and your concept of a day duration is dramatically different. Your timetable is dramatically different. Now, it's, what time is it? 3 a.m. I'm making a video, right? I could go to bed, but I decide not to because I've got infinite light anytime I want, whenever I want, wherever I live, for whatever reason. That's pretty incredible. That allows me to do all sorts of things, including reacting to stupid videos for no particularly good reason. Because of this axiom that exists inside my life, it is exceedingly difficult for me to relate to somebody where 50% of his or her day would be in pitch black darkness. I can't relate. I can't imagine a life like that. Like, I'm frequently sleep deprived, for example, which makes me miserable. And I'm stupid enough to be making this video right now, which will make me more miserable tomorrow. But it is a choice. I am sleep deprived by choice. I've got this level of luxury that anybody 200 years ago couldn't have vaguely imagined. Okay? And that is my fundamental contention with many of these arguments and points that use historical arguments. The historical arguments are almost always myopic. They're looking back in a way that can't relate to what happened then. Point number one. Point number two, they're utilized to bolster your current ideas. This is just a sequence of fallacies. There's nothing wrong with learning from the past, reading the past and trying to understand it and trying to apply learnings from said past to today. That's okay. But when one is saying, today the proles are the people who work at a desk, I mean, I want to hazard the concept that I think it's rather probable that 400 years ago, for common folk, sitting down would have been, a deliberate activity. Now it's a default concept. He's sitting down in this video, perhaps, I would imagine. I think you can see a chair in the back. I'm sitting down as well. You're probably sitting down watching this. I, or this man, cannot fathom what the past would have been like. Simple. Simple as that. Okay? Then, he then launches himself in all of his theories. For example, he talks about my favorite word, sarcastically speaking, society, as a default thing. So much so that he puts it in the title. Society lied to us. I mean, society lied to us in and of itself as a title merits a debate. Whose society? I'm assuming that his definition of society is a somewhat amorphous group of people. We're assuming we're talking about adults, okay? Or I'm assuming we're talking about adults who all belong to some sort of common mindset, location, some kind of potential family ties. I don't know, okay? Then it lied. So society, don't you know, actually has a mind. Not only a mind, it has a mouth. Society speaks to me. It's like a Ouija board. Okay? And then it lied to whom? It lied to us. Who is us? Me and him. and you. Right? Us three. Okay. Are we a society, us three? Are we part of the very society that's aligned to us? Society is a fantastic term. It reminds me of the term gender. So, gender is not supposed to be a synonym for sex. As we call it, biological sex, as if there were any other kind. Okay? Biological sex and gender are not synonyms. They must be used separately. One is effectively speaking some kind of thing that's tantamount to sexual preference. The other one is defined by one's chromosomes, their expression, and fundamentally your genitalia, the physical bits. Okay. However, when you have a government form, it says gender now. And you'd go, okay, so I can put whatever, helicopter or whatever these people say, right? I can put that, right? Then it puts the options. And it says M or F. And then sometimes it says other, or sometimes it says rather not say. Pick a damn lane. So, in this particular case, to return to our society, Joy, yeah, society, which is us, lied to us, which is society. That's circular. This level of cosmic stupidity can only exist in what Thomas Sowell would describe as unintellectual. Here is a prime example. This intellectual said to me earlier that if I need to work to survive, I'm part of the working class. And then he said, somebody like Bill Gates must not work. Let's take Jeff Bezos. That's a better example. Somebody like Jeff Bezos doesn't need to work to survive, and he commands other people. He's in the elite class. Yeah, but he bloody got there. When he started, right, he was this poor bastard in an office, balding, right, going all stressed out. And then he decided, I'm going to start selling books on the internet where nobody else was doing it, and so on. And then, complicated thing, and now it's a ginormous company, right? None of these pseudo-intellectuals, again, as Thomas Sowell always complains about, actually, in most of his books, ever account for time, for changes in one's life. This, in fact, undermines the entire concept of a class system. When you read history, when one reads history, for example, about India or about medieval Europe or ancient Rome, etc., one sees the class system being described all over the place, right? Patricians, plebeians, that sort of stuff. Okay, cool. However, certainly today, it is impossible in the West to argue that there is a class system. I know every politician does, but every politician is a liar. Right? Problem is also these people are liars. They're just too stupid to know it. So they are not so much liars, they're just hypocrites. Right? Meaning they don't know they're lying, they're convinced they're lying, and their very life proves that they're lying to themselves. It's just they're not bright enough to notice it. Okay? So to continue, in the working class, I would be in there, presumably, right? Because of the numbers he mentioned. I must be worth at least $3 million to be outside of the working class and go into the middle class. A banker is in the middle class, according to what he said. I'm afraid we're going to have to, that it will depend on where you live, because if you're a banker in Spain, I'm assuming you don't make anywhere near as much money as a banker somewhere in New York. I'm assuming even New York and Cincinnati is going to have numbers that are very, very different. Right? So, or where this chap is, I think he's probably Ontario or Nova Scotia based on the accent, I'm not sure. So, he's definitely Canadian. Now, the bringing shame to our name. I'm acquired Canadian though. So, what was I going to say? Stop distracting your own self, Mike. Sorry. Right. Right. So, I am in the working class because I can't command anyone. Not entirely true. I've got children. So that's stupid. And he's gonna accuse me of a reductio ad absurdum for having said what I've said. But never mind. Like I said, they don't like things that don't agree with their narratives. The intellectuals, that is. Next, I don't qualify for the threshold of money. I'm not worth 3 million. I'm worth way less. But way less. Dramatically less. Right? And at the moment, I think I'm genuinely transitioning slightly into myself feeling poor. I do not know whether I am in the poverty line. These lines move all the time, etc., etc. But a very simple cliche, a very simple point, yeah? Nowadays, the poor have a mobile phone. The poor have a fridge. The poor have some kind of housing arrangement, whether it's rented or purchased. Obviously, hobos exist. Fine, right? Maybe we could call those the poor, but the hobos are a teensy sliver. Okay? The point is, the people that today would fit under the poverty line, according to Government 57, okay, would be people who would be unfathomably rich compared to anyone 50 years back. Easy. Like, compared to my grandma, and I've met her, talked to her, etc. She lived a much humbler life with dramatically lower expenses than today. Like, her bills would have been really low. Would have been minimal use of electricity, and it would have been cheaper, right? Would have been minimal use of water. She used to save everything. All of them saved everything. Like, when you bought some cheese, you wouldn't buy cheese in packets made out of plastic. You'd go to the guy that sells you cheese. You buy a small piece of cheese, right? Which is so much cheaper because the guy is super specialized in cheeses. Then, as you use the cheese, you have the sort of the butt of the cheese, the back of the cheese. I don't know what the technical term for it. And you keep that to make broth. Right? That's what Grandma used to do. Grandma used to save on everything. That's because she was poor and she had no debts. Unlike, I'm sure, this chap is sinking in right now. But I don't know. So was she richer? Was she poorer? I don't know. But in terms of the kind of trinkets and toys that I can play with nowadays, I am dramatically richer than she ever was. Because eras work differently, but these stupid concepts like classes keep coming back because the intellectuals desperately need them to have any meaning in life, to collectivize people. And in his case, he is totally bat guano, because what he's doing is he's putting the lowest class possible so freaking ample, so large, that it loses all meaning. I mean, at that point, the elites are around in error. Right? The elites command, they own a company, etc. But, I mean, the hunter-gatherers needed to grab all sorts of, to use all of their time to gather resources and then consume them. That was their entire life, right? The poorest person now spends 8 hours scrolling TikTok. The poorest person, I mean, that's a funny, almost allegorical observation, which is the poorest people are now obese and the elites are anorexic. I mean, if that doesn't tell you that things are a bit right, that this machinery of slotting people into boxes just doesn't work. Okay? In other words, society, which doesn't exist, can't lie to you because it doesn't have a mind or a mouth and can't speak to you. You're imagining things. And us is society again. I mean, mate, the only thing that works in this sentence is your preposition. Arguably. We're all wage slaves. I can prove it. No, what you can prove is the following, sir. And it's very, very basic. Nobody owes you anything, for there is no society. Therefore, what happens is you need to invest some of your time, effort, skill, whatever. The skill is obtained through time as well, so that's circular. But in order to obtain a resource we refer to as money, which can be used and converted. It's fungible. It can be converted into essentially any other resource, what you refer to as your needs and wants, which need to be separated. And this time need has been used correctly as a verb, okay? In your case, you're using it as a noun, but that's okay. It's the same concept. Your needs are nom nom, poop poop, sleep sleep, and a few other things. That's a need. Okay? A camera for YouTube is not a need. Okay, good. The wants then are the beautiful things that you like to adorn your life with. Now, what's happening here is that back in the day, the needs took a huge... There you go. Let's say this is the needs and this is the wants. There's the camera. Wants, needs. I'm gonna close the wants in a fist. So, the way it used to be, that the needs took all of the space. That was the needs. There. And your wants wasn't even there. There would have been the hunter-gatherer time, I'm assuming. Then, where's my other fist? There you go. Then the wants start creeping in a little bit. There they are. What the hell am I doing? They're tiny over there. And then they start becoming bigger. And now, today, the vast majority of people live here. The needs are a tiny little fart in space, okay? And your wants occupy your entire life. Which is why right here I'm talking to you at 3 a.m. I need to sleep. I could go to sleep. But I'm choosing not to go to sleep so I can talk rubbish on the internet like you. That, my friend, is because the pyramid that you are describing is indeed so retardedly backwards that I don't know what to say. Okay, people who are ultra mega rich to a degree that's almost comical, of course they're a very tiny sliver. For obvious reasons, those are very, very, very special people. And by special, I don't mean particularly good. They could have been born in it, even though I suspect that's a very, very low amount. But they're people who have done, usually, exceedingly remarkable things. Which then, and they're intelligent with their money. For example, I'm not. So, I'm not there. Right? But at least I don't have any debts, unlike, I'm guessing, you. Okay? Just by probability, really. So, then... there is a huge chunk of people which don't belong in any class. In fact, I would argue not even the elites belong in any class. When you talk about the elites, for instance, you don't talk about the IKEA guy. Why? Because you don't even know where he is. He's still driving his old beat-up Volvo and doesn't care at all about controlling you. He just wants to sell you paper furniture. That's IKEA boy. Right? Anyway, you're very picky and choosy with the elites. Right? Anyhow, the rest are all people living in a strange world with lots of other people, all of which have a certain level of effect on one another. It's much more similar to some kind of saprophytic or symbiontic, even in best cases, colonies of separate individual entities, each with their own desires and wishes and goals. Some loftier than others. Some more universally moral than others. And so on and so forth. It is endlessly complicated. Reducing individuals. See, that's the paradox. Reducing individuals to one large, single-minded collective, like the word society denotes, is offensive to the individual. For the individual has choices and desires. The individual moves. The individual works more or less. In fact, I so don't fit his definition of the working class because I also, like everybody, including the elites, in order to eat, need to do something. The elites have just done it earlier in life. And now they reap the benefits because they've done it particularly well. Right? But for me, I haven't done it that well, so I still need to do it and I will keep on having to do it. But I have made a lot of decisions that walk away from that constantly. With my wife recently, we have managed to dramatically reduce our costs of living. And we own everything. So the only thing that's fundamentally killing us constantly is tax. That's the one thing that's making our lives almost impossible. What's not making my life impossible is going to the grocers, because I go to the grocers, I give him some of my money, and the grocers give me food. So there is an exchange. The government doesn't give me anything. That's an exaggeration, but generally it is not that untrue of a statement, right? So I'm constantly being milked in that way through law. But it's not the elites milking me, at least not the elites you think. It's not the elites that have 3 million, billion, zillion. It would be the elites in government that have a lot less than that, but they sure have a propensity to enjoy power. And they absolutely do not have the testicular fortitude to admit we are so stupid with money that we are spending money we don't have that would technically belong to your grandchildren, who fortunately you don't have because you're so depressed by now, okay? Because you need to donate everything to us, government that would be, without having a possibility of saying no. What man has lost, and that's why they are controlled, is the possibility of saying no and minding their own business and making their own decisions. Now, that loss is quite a lot more imaginary than one thinks. Because while, yes, I have to pay my tax and so on and so forth, otherwise I'll get arrested, I can disobey on almost everything else. And that's surely what I do. I have multiple passports. Why? Because if there's a war in place A, I go to place B where there isn't one. And if there's war in both, well, tough. I guess I'm going to be a tourist somewhere else for a bit. I don't want to participate in any of your stinking wars of your stinking society. I don't want to be part of the group that you're inventing and desperately shoving me into, young man. Your stupidity does not need to define my life. And the same feedback applies to you, applies to the Sargonovacads of this world, and applies to the politicians and the teachers in schools, etc. The sheer quantity of individuals that are desperate to fit into this society of their invention and their perpetuation, okay, leaves people like myself who'd rather like to think for themselves and don't want to be part of your crappy club uncomfortable. Because I can't go anywhere without finding irritating people such as yourself in my life. Technically, I would be a member of the proletariat. I have pro and not much else. You have a baby in the background screaming. But you clearly have a very, very, very fancy house that's all tidy and nice, etc., etc. And none of the stuff in the picture I see, including the stupid hat you're wearing, is a need. Or your perfectly curated beard. Anyway, so 43 minutes, not bad. Nobody's going to watch this, but that's okay. It's for the kids, for the future, one day, when they're bored. Society doesn't exist. It doesn't lie because it can't speak or think. Us is the same society which also doesn't exist because us doesn't exist. We doesn't exist. Is the verb, so I'll give you it. All, not true at all. We're not all wage slaves, even in your own thing. You're using all as a hyperbole to approximate the majority. That's what you're trying to say. But you are using all because you know that that will help with the manipulation aspect of the algorithmic nature of how videos are shown in YouTube. Their little program makes all is much better than most from that perspective, right? Then a wage concept is so modern that somebody with your level of intellect should find themselves offended by themselves for using it. A wage is a modern concept. Certainly when expressed in money. So are taxes, I suppose. Though taxes are about as ancient as the entire planet, expressed in anything you like. Slaves. No. No. You are not a slave of anything outside of your own lack of intellect. And I can prove it. Well, my friend, that is what a Frenchman would have said, le bollocks. And on that note, bonsoir. Or au revoir. Oh, hopefully not.